The rain hammered against the windshield of Detective Sarah Martinez's patrol car as she navigated the dark streets of Denver's Industrial District at 2:47 a.m. Her radio had been silent for the past hour, but she knew that silence could break at any moment with either the news every officer prayed for or the call that would haunt her forever. For 72 grueling hours, the entire police department had been searching for 7-year-old Emma Chun, who had vanished from her elementary school playground during recess on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Sarah had seen too many cases like this in her 15 years on the force. Children who disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only frantic parents and communities paralyzed by fear. Emma's case had gripped the city particularly hard. A bright, artistic little girl with pigtails and a gap-toothed smile, who loved drawing butterflies and reading stories to her pet hamster. Her adoptive parents, David and Linda Johnson, had provided the media with dozens of photos showing Emma's infectious laugh and curious brown eyes that seemed to sparkle with mischief. The search had consumed every available resource. Helicopters with thermal imaging swept the mountains surrounding Denver. Dive teams dragged the South Platte River. Hundreds of volunteers combed through abandoned buildings, parks, and construction sites. The FBI had joined the investigation on day 2, bringing their behavioral analysts and sophisticated tracking equipment. Yet despite all the technology and manpower, Emma Chun had simply vanished as if she had never existed. Sarah's radio suddenly crackled to life, sending electricity through her exhaustion. Unit 47 to dispatch. We found her. Repeat, we found the Chun girl. She's alive. The voice belonged to Officer Dan Murphy, Rex's handler from the K-9 unit. Sarah's heart pounded as she grabbed her radio. Martinez responding. What's your location? Abandoned Riverside Warehouse District, Building 7. Send paramedics immediately. And Sarah, bring the crisis team. This kid's been through hell. Sarah floored the accelerator, her tires squealing against the wet asphalt. The warehouse district was a maze of crumbling buildings and broken dreams, where Denver's industrial past had been left to decay. Building 7 had been empty for years, its windows boarded up and walls covered with graffiti. It was exactly the kind of place predators chose to hide their victims, isolated, forgotten, and far from prying eyes. When Sarah arrived at the scene, the area was already swarming with emergency vehicles. Red and blue lights painted the brick walls in eerie colors, and the air buzzed with radio chatter and shouted commands. She spotted Officer Murphy near the building's entrance, his German Shepherd Rex sitting calmly beside him, despite the chaos. Murphy's face was grim, the kind of expression veteran cops wore when they had seen something that would stay with them forever. Where is she? Sarah asked, jogging toward them through the rain. Basement level, southeast corner, Murphy replied, his voice tight. We followed Rex's nose down there. Found her in what used to be a utility closet, hidden behind some old machinery. She was conscious, but double quotes. He paused, struggling with the words. She hasn't said a word to any of us. Just keeps asking for the dog. Sarah descended into the basement with Murphy and Rex. The air was thick with the smell of mold, rust, and something else, fear. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing a space that had been turned into a makeshift prison. A dirty mattress lay in one corner. Empty food containers and water bottles were scattered around. On the wall, someone had scratched days into the concrete with what looked like a small stone. In the utility closet, Sarah found Emma Chun. The little girl was barely recognizable from the smiling photos that had been plastered across every news station in Colorado. Her clothes were filthy and torn. Her hair, once neatly braided, hung in tangled knots around her face. She clutched the remains of a teddy bear that had been ripped and stained beyond recognition. But it was her eyes that broke Sarah's heart. They held a hollow, distant look that no 7-year-old should ever have. Emma was surrounded by paramedics and social workers, all trying to coax her into speaking. She sat perfectly still, her back pressed against the concrete wall, staring at nothing. Every time someone approached her, she would shrink further into herself, making herself as small as possible. Then Rex entered the closet. The change in Emma was instantaneous and miraculous. Her empty eyes suddenly focused, and she looked directly at the German Shepherd with recognition and relief. Without hesitation, she crawled across the dirty floor toward Rex, her small hands reaching for his golden fur. The adult stepped back in amazement as Emma wrapped her arms around the dog's neck and began whispering in his ear. "He took me," Sarah heard Emma whisper to Rex, her voice barely audible but crystal clear in the sudden silence. "He took me from the playground, but I knew you would come. I knew the angels would send you to find me." Rex sat perfectly still, his intelligent brown eyes focused intently on Emma's face as if he understood every word. His training as a search and rescue dog had taught him to remain calm in crisis situations. But there was something almost human in the way he positioned himself to provide comfort to the traumatized child. Sarah exchanged glances with the other officers present. In all her years on the force, she had never witnessed such an immediate and profound connection between a victim and a police dog. Emma continued whispering to Rex, telling him things she refused to share with any human present. "The scary man said no one would look for me here," Emma told Rex, her small fingers tangled in his fur. "But I told him he was wrong, because good dogs always find lost children. I told him you were coming to save me." Child psychologist Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had arrived with the crisis team, observed the interaction with fascination and concern. She had worked with hundreds of traumatized children, but she had never seen a victim who would only communicate with an animal. It was both heartbreaking and remarkable. Emma had found her voice, but only Rex could hear it. When social workers attempted to separate Emma from Rex to transport her to the hospital, the little girl's reaction was immediate and terrifying. She screamed with a primal fear that echoed through the basement, clinging to Rex with desperate strength. Her cries were so heartbreaking that even seasoned emergency responders had to step away to compose themselves. "Please," Emma sobbed to Rex, "don't let them take me away from you. Don't let the scary man find me again." Officer Murphy made the unprecedented decision to transport Rex with Emma to Denver Children's Hospital. As they loaded Emma into the ambulance, Rex jumped up beside her stretcher without being commanded, instinctively understanding his role as her protector and confidant. During the 20-minute ride to the hospital, Emma never stopped talking to Rex. She told him about the dark place where she had been kept, about the man who had taken her, and about how she had stayed brave by imagining that a police dog would find her and bring her home. Medical personnel monitored her vital signs while marveling at the therapeutic effect the dog was having on their patient. "In 20 years of pediatric emergency medicine, I've never seen anything like this," whispered Dr. Patricia Hansen as she watched Emma's heart rate stabilize whenever she touched Rex's fur. As they reached the hospital, Sarah realized they were dealing with far more than a simple rescue case. Emma Chun had survived her ordeal, but she had formed a bond with Rex that transcended normal human-animal relationships. Whatever had happened to her during those 72 hours had created a connection that would challenge everything the legal system thought it knew about witness testimony and victim recovery. The miracle discovery of Emma Chun alive was just the beginning of a story that would captivate the nation and forever change how the justice system approached cases involving traumatized children. But in that moment, as Rex settled beside Emma's hospital bed like a furry guardian angel, all that mattered was that a lost little girl had been found, and she finally felt safe enough to start healing. 3 weeks had passed since Emma Chun's miraculous rescue, and Detective Sarah Martinez found herself staring at the same case file that had consumed her every waking moment. The stack of witness statements, forensic reports, and investigative leads sat mockingly on her desk, representing dozens of dead ends and false hopes. Despite having the victim alive and seemingly recovering, the case remained frustratingly stagnant. Emma Chun, the key to solving her own kidnapping, refused to speak to anyone except Rex. The Denver Police Department had never encountered anything quite like it. Captain Robert Hayes had called it the most backwards case in departmental history. They had the victim, they had evidence, but they couldn't access the most crucial testimony because their witness would only talk to a German shepherd. The media had caught wind of the unusual situation, dubbing Emma the girl who speaks to dogs, which only added pressure to an already complex investigation. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the child psychologist assigned to Emma's case, had spent countless hours observing the little girl through one-way mirrors at the Denver Children's Crisis Center. Her clinical notes read like something from a medical journal, documenting an unprecedented phenomenon. Emma exhibited classic symptoms of selective mutism, triggered by severe trauma. But with a unique twist, she wasn't completely silent. She simply refused to communicate with humans. It's the most extraordinary case of animal-assisted therapy I've ever witnessed, Dr. Walsh explained to Detective Martinez during one of their weekly meetings. Emma has formed what we call a trauma bond with Rex. In her mind, he represents safety, protection, and understanding. Humans, on the other hand, represent the species that hurt her. She's created a psychological barrier that only Rex can penetrate. The implications were staggering. Emma had been living with the Johnson family, her foster parents, for 2 months before her kidnapping. Linda and David Johnson were heartbroken that the little girl they had grown to love, now recoiled from their touch, refused to acknowledge their presence. They watched helplessly as their daughter communicated freely with a police dog, but treated them like dangerous strangers. She used to run to me when she had nightmares, Linda Johnson confided to Sarah during a particularly difficult interview. Now she screams if I try to comfort her. The only time she seems like herself is when Officer Murphy brings Rex for his visits. Then she lights up like the Emma we used to know. Officer Dan Murphy had become an unexpected central figure in the investigation. His twice-daily visits with Rex to the crisis center had become Emma's lifeline to the outside world. Murphy, a 20-year veteran of the K-9 unit, had never seen his dog respond to a human the way Rex responded to Emma. The German shepherd seemed to understand his role as Emma's translator and protector, positioning himself between her and any adults who approached too quickly. During these visits, Emma would spend hours in animated conversation with Rex. She would sit cross-legged on the floor of the therapy room, her small hands buried in his thick fur, speaking in hushed tones that the monitoring equipment could barely pick up. Child services workers and detectives would watch from the observation room, straining to catch fragments of her testimony. "She's telling him everything," Dr. Walsh reported after one particularly long session. "I can see her lips moving constantly. She's describing events, giving details, even drawing pictures while she talks. But the moment any human enters that room, she shuts down completely. It's like watching someone turn off a light switch." The drawings were perhaps the most disturbing and enlightening evidence they had. Emma would sketch while talking to Rex, creating disturbing images that clearly depicted her ordeal. One drawing showed a man with a distinctive facial scar standing next to a red pickup truck decorated with flame decals. Another showed a dark room with boarded windows and a mattress on the floor. Most heartbreaking was a picture of a little girl holding hands with a large dog under a rainbow, with the words "Rex saves me" written in shaky letters across the top. Social worker Maria Gonzalez had been documenting Emma's behavior patterns since her rescue. Her reports painted a picture of a severely traumatized child who had found an unconventional path to healing. Emma exhibits hypervigilance around all adult humans, Maria noted in her files. She positions herself near exits, flinches at sudden movements, and shows signs of dissociation when approached by strangers. However, in Rex's presence, these symptoms virtually disappear. She makes eye contact, shows appropriate emotional responses, and engages in what appears to be complex verbal communication. The legal implications of Emma's selective communication were unprecedented. District Attorney Michael Richardson had consulted with legal experts across the country, trying to find precedent for a case where the primary witness would only speak to an animal. Constitutional lawyers debated whether testimony given to a non-human could be considered reliable evidence. The defense attorneys for potential suspects were already arguing that dog-mediated testimony violated their clients' rights to face their accusers. Meanwhile, the investigation into Emma's kidnapping was yielding frustrating results. Forensic evidence from the warehouse basement had provided some leads DNA samples that didn't match anyone in the system, tire tracks from the loading dock, and fingerprints on the makeshift prison materials. But without Emma's direct testimony about her captor, investigators were working with fragments and assumptions. Detective Martinez had begun spending her own time at the crisis center, watching Emma's sessions with Rex and trying to piece together the mystery from the little girl's one-sided conversations. She had learned to read Emma's body language and vocal patterns, developing an almost supernatural ability to interpret the child's whispered communications with her canine confidant. "She keeps mentioning someone with hurt face," Sarah reported to the investigative team. "And she's described a truck with fire pictures multiple times. She also talks about a place that smells like Daddy's garage where cars get fixed." These aren't random details. She's giving us a profile of her kidnapper and the location where she was held before the warehouse. The breakthrough came during Emma's 15th session with Rex. Maria Gonzalez was monitoring the session when she noticed Emma becoming increasingly agitated while drawing. The little girl was sketching frantically while talking rapidly to Rex, her voice becoming more audible with her distress. "Tell them, Rex," Emma said, her voice rising above its usual whisper. "Tell them about the scary man's truck. Tell them he has a hurt face like mine." She touched her own cheek, where a small scar was still healing from her ordeal. "Tell them he lives where the broken cars sleep." Maria immediately called Detective Martinez, who arrived within minutes to review the session recording. As they watched Emma's animated conversation with Rex, Sarah felt the familiar electric sensation that accompanied a major breakthrough. Emma wasn't just talking to Rex, she was giving him detailed information about her kidnapper, trusting him to somehow communicate it to the humans who could bring justice. The most significant moment came when Emma pulled out a fresh piece of paper and began drawing while looking directly at Rex. "This is what he looks like," she told the dog. "Draw him in your memory, Rex, so the police people can find him and make sure he can't steal other little girls." The resulting sketch was remarkably detailed for a 7-year-old's artwork. It showed a man with a jagged scar running from his left ear to his chin, wearing a baseball cap and a mechanic's coveralls. The red pickup truck in the background featured distinctive flame decals along the sides and what appeared to be primer gray patches on the hood. Dr. Walsh called it proxy testimony. Emma was using Rex as an intermediary to communicate crucial information to law enforcement. The little girl had found a way to overcome her trauma-induced mutism by speaking through the one being she trusted completely. It was unprecedented, heartbreaking, and potentially the key to solving her case. As Detective Martinez studied Emma's latest drawings and listened to recordings of her conversations with Rex, she realized they were dealing with more than just an unusual witness situation. Emma Chun had survived something horrific, but her bond with Rex was helping her process and communicate her trauma in ways that traditional therapy couldn't achieve. The challenge now was finding a way to translate Emma's whispered confessions to a police dog into legally admissible evidence that could bring her kidnapper to justice. The investigation was about to take a dramatic turn, but it would require everyone involved to think outside the conventional boundaries of law enforcement and child psychology. Emma was ready to tell her story. She just needed Rex to help her find her voice. Detective Sarah Martinez had been staring at Emma's drawings for so long that the images seemed to burn themselves into her retinas. Spread across the conference room table at the Denver Police Department were dozens of sketches, each one a fragment of a 7-year-old's nightmare, meticulously documented over weeks of sessions with Rex. The latest drawing, however, was different. It contained details so specific and distinctive that Sarah's pulse quickened, with the recognition that they might finally have their breakthrough. The sketch showed a red pickup truck with flame decals that weren't generic automotive accessories. They were hand-painted in an amateur but distinctive style. The flames had an unusual pattern, almost tribal in appearance, extending from the front wheel wells to the cab doors. More importantly, Emma had drawn what appeared to be body damage on the truck's hood, depicting primer gray patches that suggested recent collision repair. But it was the license plate that made Sarah's breath catch. Emma had drawn letters and numbers with remarkable precision. BK2847. This isn't a child's imagination, Sarah told Captain Hayes as she pointed to the intricate details in Emma's artwork. She's drawing from memory, and her memory is photographically accurate. Look at the consistency across all her sketches. The same scar pattern on the perpetrator, the same truck details, even the same environmental elements. This kid is giving us a masterclass in witness identification, but she's doing it through a police dog. Captain Hayes studied the drawings with the methodical attention of a 30-year veteran. Have we run these details through the motor vehicle database? That's exactly what I want to do, Sarah replied, already reaching for her phone. If this truck exists with these specifications, we can find it. And if we can find the truck, we can find our suspect. The motor vehicle record search took less than an hour to produce results. That sent shockwaves through the investigative team. License plate BK2847 belonged to a red 2018 Ford F-150 registered to Robert Bobby Kellerman, a 34-year-old resident of Aurora, Colorado. Kellerman had a criminal history that made everyone in the room feel sick. 2 prior arrests for child endangerment, 1 conviction for attempted kidnapping that had resulted in only 18 months in prison due to a plea bargain, and a restraining order filed by his ex-wife citing inappropriate behavior around children. This is our guy, Detective Martinez announced to the assembled task force. Everything matches: the vehicle description, the timeline, even the location. Kellerman works as a mechanic at Riverside Auto Repair, which is less than 2 miles from the warehouse where we found Emma. He would have had access to the building through the industrial complex. FBI behavioral analyst Dr. Amanda Foster had been quietly reviewing Kellerman's file during the briefing. His pattern fits perfectly with Emma's case, she reported. Previous offenses involved children between ages 5 and 8, all taken from public locations like parks or schools. He has a history of keeping victims for extended periods before releasing them, which aligns with Emma's 3-day captivity. Most significantly, his last known address is in a residential area near Emma's elementary school. The team immediately began surveillance of Kellerman's current address, a rundown duplex in a working-class neighborhood where several other registered sex offenders had congregated. The property matched Emma's descriptions in disturbing detail. The backyard contained an automotive repair area with disabled vehicles, explaining her references to a place where broken cars sleep. The strong smell of motor oil and cigarettes that Emma had mentioned to Rex would be consistent with someone who worked in automotive repair and was a heavy smoker. But it was the physical evidence that provided the most damning confirmation. When investigators obtained a warrant to search Kellerman's property, they discovered items that directly correlated with Emma's testimony to Rex. In the garage, they found children's clothing that didn't belong to any known family members. Hidden under a workbench were photographs of local elementary schools, including Emma's school. Most horrifying was a journal containing detailed observations about suitable subjects with physical descriptions that matched Emma perfectly. Social worker Maria Gonzalez was present when Detective Martinez showed Emma a photo lineup containing Kellerman's picture. The little girl's reaction was immediate and visceral. She ran directly to Rex, who had been brought specifically for this identification procedure, and buried her face in his fur, while her small body trembled with fear. "That's him, Rex," Emma whispered loud enough for the recording equipment to capture clearly. "That's the scary man with the hurt face. Tell them he's the one who took me from the playground. Tell them he said I was his special princess, but he was lying because princesses don't get locked in dark places." Emma's identification was emotionally devastating to witness, but legally it presented unprecedented challenges. Defense attorneys would argue that a child's whispered statement to a dog could not constitute reliable eyewitness testimony. The prosecution would need to build a case that relied heavily on physical evidence while finding creative ways to present Emma's communications with Rex. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had been documenting Emma's behavioral patterns during the identification process. Emma's physiological responses to Kellerman's photograph were consistent with trauma recognition, she reported. Increased heart rate, shallow breathing, and immediate seeking of her established comfort source Rex. These are involuntary responses that indicate genuine fear and recognition, not coached testimony or false memories. The breakthrough extended beyond just identifying the suspect. Emma's continued conversations with Rex were providing investigators with a detailed timeline of her captivity. She had told Rex about being taken from the school playground during recess, about being driven to the place where cars get fixed before being moved to the dark basement with no windows. She described being given specific foods, peanut butter, sandwiches, and chocolate milk, details that investigators later found evidence of at Kellerman's residence. "She's not just identifying her attacker," Detective Martinez explained to the district attorney's office. "She's providing us with a comprehensive account of the entire kidnapping, from initial contact to rescue. The problem is that she's only willing to share this information with Rex, which creates legal challenges we've never encountered before." Officer Dan Murphy had become more than just Rex's handler during this investigation. He had become Emma's bridge to the human world. His observations of the interactions between Emma and Rex provided crucial context for understanding the little girl's testimony. "Rex responds to her differently than he responds to anyone else," Murphy reported. "It's like he understands that she's fragile and needs special protection. When she talks to him about the scary events, he positions himself to block her view of any adults in the room. When she talks about feeling safe, he relaxes and lets her lean against him. It's almost like he's conducting therapy." The most significant development came when Emma began drawing maps while talking to Rex. Her sketches showed the route from her elementary school to Kellerman's garage, complete with landmarks she had observed during the drive. One drawing depicted a distinctive water tower with graffiti. Another showed a railroad crossing near a fast food restaurant. When investigators drove the route from Emma's school to Kellerman's property, they found every landmark exactly as she had drawn it. This level of detail is remarkable for any witness, but especially for a traumatized 7-year-old, FBI agent Patricia Woods noted in her report. "Emma Chun has provided us with more accurate intelligence than most adult witnesses could manage. Her recall is photographic, her descriptions are precise, and her timeline is consistent. The only unusual aspect is that she's communicating this information exclusively through an intermediary, Rex." As the evidence mounted against Robert Kellerman, the legal team faced the unprecedented challenge of building a prosecution case around testimony given to a police dog. Emma's communications with Rex had provided them with everything they needed to secure a conviction-detailed suspect. Identification, precise crime scene descriptions, accurate timeline reconstruction, and corroborating physical evidence. The question was whether the court system was prepared to accept such unconventional testimony. The case had attracted national attention from legal scholars, child psychologists, and animal behaviorists who recognized its potential to set groundbreaking precedents. Emma Chun's whispered confessions to Rex represented a new frontier in trauma recovery and witness testimony, challenging traditional assumptions about how children process and communicate their experiences of violence. As Detective Martinez prepared her final report on the identification phase of the investigation, she reflected on the extraordinary courage of a little girl who had found her voice through an unlikely partnership with a German Shepherd. Emma had not only survived her ordeal, but was actively participating in bringing her attacker to justice, using Rex as her translator and protector in a process that was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The next phase would determine whether Emma's unique form of testimony could withstand the scrutiny of the courtroom, and whether justice could be served through the unprecedented bond between a traumatized child and her canine guard. The morning news trucks began arriving at the Denver courthouse at dawn, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metal flowers reaching for the story that had captivated the nation. Inside the building, District Attorney Michael Richardson sat in his office surrounded by law books, legal precedents, and constitutional scholars' opinions, all attempting to answer a question that had never been asked in American jurisprudence. Could the testimony of a 7-year-old girl given exclusively to a police dog be admitted as evidence in a criminal trial? "We're in completely uncharted legal territory," Richardson confided to his chief prosecutor, Lisa Chun, as they reviewed the mountain of case law research that had consumed their office for weeks. "I've consulted with legal experts from Harvard to Stanford, and nobody has ever encountered anything remotely similar. We have a victim who has provided incredibly detailed, accurate testimony about her kidnapping and assault, but she's only willing to share that testimony with a German Shepherd." The constitutional implications were staggering. The Sixth Amendment guaranteed defendants the right to confront their accusers. But how could that right be exercised when the accuser would only speak to a dog? The hearsay rule, one of the fundamental principles of evidence law, prohibited second-hand testimony. But what happened when the second-hand source was an animal who couldn't be cross-examined? Defense attorney Thomas Wright, who had been appointed to represent Robert Kellerman, was having a field day with the legal absurdity of the situation. A seasoned criminal defense lawyer with 30 years of experience, Wright had built his reputation on finding constitutional violations and procedural errors that could free his clients. Emma Chun's case presented him with arguments that no defense attorney had ever been able to make. This entire prosecution is based on the alleged communications between a traumatized child and an animal, Wright argued during a pre-trial hearing. "My client has the constitutional right to face his accuser and cross-examine witnesses against him. How exactly does the prosecution propose that I cross-examine a dog? Should I bark my questions? Will Rex take the oath with his paw on a Bible?" The absurdity of this situation should be enough to dismiss all charges immediately. Wright's arguments weren't just courtroom theatrics. They were raising legitimate questions that legal scholars across the country were debating. Professor Margaret Hamilton from Columbia Law School had published an emergency legal brief arguing that animal-mediated testimony violated fundamental principles of due process. "While our hearts go out to this traumatized child," Hamilton wrote, "we cannot abandon centuries of legal precedent based on emotional appeals. The reliability of testimony given to an animal cannot be verified through traditional legal mechanisms." However, other legal experts were arguing equally passionately for the admissibility of Emma's testimony. Professor David Chun from Yale Law School had filed an amicus brief arguing that excluding Emma's testimony would create a dangerous precedent that could silence other trauma victims. The courts have consistently evolved to protect vulnerable witnesses, Shun wrote. We've allowed closed-circuit television for child witnesses, therapy dogs for emotional support, and special procedures for victims of sexual assault. This case represents the next logical step in ensuring that justice is not denied simply because a victim's trauma has affected their ability to communicate in traditional ways. The media coverage had transformed the case into a national obsession. Cable news networks ran hour-long specials analyzing every aspect of Emma's story. Social media platforms buzzed with hashtags like hashtag Emma and Rex and hashtag Justice for Emma. Child advocacy groups rallied behind Emma's right to testify in whatever manner felt safe to her. Animal rights organizations argued that Rex's role demonstrated the therapeutic value of human-animal bonds. Legal commentators debated the constitutional implications on every major news program. The attention was taking a severe toll on Emma and her family. Linda and David Johnson had been forced to hire security after reporters began camping outside their home. Emma's therapy sessions with Rex had to be moved to undisclosed locations to avoid media interference. The little girl, who was already struggling with trauma-induced anxiety, was now dealing with the additional stress of public scrutiny. Emma doesn't understand why strangers want to take her picture, Linda Johnson told social worker Maria Gonzalez during one of their sessions. She thinks the scary people from television are trying to find her like the man who took her did. She's having nightmares again, and the only thing that calms her down is when Rex is here. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had become the key expert witness in the pre-trial proceedings, testifying about Emma's psychological condition and the therapeutic relationship she had formed with Rex. Her professional opinion would be crucial in determining whether Emma's testimony could be considered reliable and admissible. Emma exhibits classic symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, specifically related to human contact. Dr. Walsh testified before Judge Patricia Hamilton during a closed hearing. She has formed what we call a trauma bond with Rex, viewing him as her protector and safe confidant. This is not a childhood fantasy or an inability to distinguish reality from imagination. Emma's communication with Rex represents a sophisticated coping mechanism that has allowed her to process and verbalize her traumatic experience. Judge Hamilton, a respected jurist with 25 years on the bench, had presided over thousands of cases involving child witnesses, but nothing had prepared her for the complexity of Emma's situation. The judge had spent weeks reviewing legal precedents, consulting with child psychology experts, and studying the unique aspects of trauma-informed justice. Her decision would likely be appealed regardless of which way she ruled, potentially reaching the Supreme Court. This court recognizes that we are dealing with unprecedented circumstances, Judge Hamilton stated during one of the preliminary hearings. We have a child victim who has provided detailed, consistent, and apparently accurate testimony about serious felony charges. The unusual aspect is not the reliability of her testimony, but the method through which she has chosen to communicate it. The court must balance the defendant's constitutional rights against the victim's right to be heard and the state's interest in prosecuting serious crimes against children. The emotional complications were equally challenging. Emma's relationship with Rex had become the central stabilizing force in her young life, but it was also becoming a source of concern for child development specialists. Some experts worried that Emma's exclusive reliance on Rex for communication was preventing her from developing healthy relationships with humans. Others argued that Rex was providing a crucial bridge that would eventually help Emma reconnect with people. Officer Dan Murphy found himself in an impossible position. His canine partner had become the most famous police dog in America, but the attention was interfering with Rex's training and duties. More importantly, Murphy was witnessing the profound impact that Emma's dependence on Rex was having on the animal. German Shepherds were intelligent, empathetic dogs, and Rex seemed to understand the weight of responsibility he carried. Rex has changed since this case began, Murphy confided to Detective Martinez. He's more protective, more alert to Emma's emotional state. Sometimes I think he understands the importance of what she's telling him better than we do. But I worry about what happens to both of them if this case drags on for months or years. Emma needs stability, and Rex needs to return to his regular duties. The prosecution team was working around the clock to build a case that could survive constitutional challenges while respecting Emma's unique needs. They had consulted with experts in child psychology, animal behavior, trauma therapy, and constitutional law. The strategy they were developing would require Judge Hamilton to make rulings that had never been made before in American courts. We're not asking the court to throw out centuries of legal precedent, Prosecutor Lisa Chun argued in her briefs. We're asking the court to recognize that justice must evolve to protect the most vulnerable members of our society. Emma Chun has provided law enforcement with detailed, accurate, and verifiable information about serious felony crimes. The fact that she has communicated this information through an intermediary should not prevent the court from considering her testimony, especially when that intermediary relationship is the direct result of trauma inflicted by the defendant. As the pre-trial hearings continued, it became clear that the case would hinge not just on legal precedent, but on society's willingness to expand its definition of justice to include victims whose trauma had forced them to find unconventional ways to seek help. Emma Chun's whispered conversations with Rex had evolved from a touching story of healing into a constitutional test case that would determine whether the legal system could adapt to protect the most vulnerable witnesses. The nation watched and waited as Judge Hamilton prepared to make a decision that would either open new pathways for trauma victims to seek justice or reinforce traditional barriers that might silence them forever. Emma continued her daily conversations with Rex, unaware that her whispered words to a police dog were challenging the very foundations of American jurisprudence. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Patricia Hamilton entered, her black robes rustling against the tension that had been building for weeks. Outside, protesters held signs reading "Justice for Emma" and "Protect our children," while legal scholars from across the nation had gathered to witness what many were calling the most important children's rights case of the century. Inside courtroom 4A of the Denver District Court, every seat was filled with reporters, legal experts, child advocates, and citizens who understood they were about to witness history. Emma Chun sat in a specially designed witness area that had been constructed over the weekend by court maintenance staff working around the clock. Gone were the traditional witness stand and formal chair that would have terrified the 8-year-old. Instead, a soft, cream-colored carpet had been installed in front of the judge's bench, surrounded by child-friendly furniture and equipped with the most advanced audio recording equipment the court system could acquire. Most notably, a comfortable dog bed had been placed directly beside where Emma would sit. Judge Hamilton had spent 3 sleepless weeks reviewing case law, consulting with constitutional scholars, and soul-searching about a decision that would either revolutionize how the American legal system treated trauma victims or potentially undermine centuries of due process protections. Her ruling, delivered just 48 hours earlier, had sent shockwaves through the legal community. This court recognizes that we stand at a crossroads between traditional legal procedure and evolving understanding of childhood trauma, Judge Hamilton had announced during her preliminary ruling. After extensive consultation with medical experts, legal scholars, and constitutional attorneys, this court finds that the unique circumstances of this case warrant extraordinary accommodations. The witness Emma Chun will be permitted to testify with her emotional support animal, Rex, present in the courtroom. Furthermore, the court will allow indirect testimony communicated through the victim's established therapeutic relationship with said animal, provided that all communications are properly recorded and subject to appropriate legal safeguards. The ruling was immediately appealed by defense attorney Thomas Wright, but the Colorado Court of Appeals had declined to issue a stay, allowing the trial to proceed while the constitutional questions worked their way through higher courts. Wright's face showed the strain of fighting a case that had no legal precedent, knowing that every argument he made was being scrutinized by constitutional law professors who would either praise his defense of due process rights or condemn him for trying to silence a child victim. Officer Dan Murphy led Rex into the courtroom with the solemnity of someone carrying the hopes of an entire community. The German Shepherd had been specially groomed for the occasion, his golden coat brushing to a lustrous shine, his canine badge polished until it gleamed. But it was Rex's behavior that struck everyone present. The usually alert and energetic police dog moved with unusual calm, as if he understood the gravity of the moment and his crucial role in the proceedings. Emma entered the courtroom holding the hand of social worker Maria Gonzalez, her small frame dwarfed by the formal majesty of the legal setting. She wore a simple blue dress that Linda Johnson had chosen because it was Emma's favorite color, the color she associated with feeling safe. Her dark hair had been braided with care, and she carried a small stuffed elephant that Dr. Jennifer Walsh had given her as a comfort object for the trial. The transformation in Emma when she saw Rex was immediate and profound. The frightened, withdrawn child who had entered the courtroom suddenly brightened, her face lighting up with genuine joy for the first time in weeks. She ran directly to Rex, who had positioned himself on the carpet area with the precision of a trained professional. As Emma settled beside him, her small hand automatically finding its place in his thick fur, everyone in the courtroom could see why this unusual arrangement was necessary. Prosecutor Lisa Chun approached the witness area with the measured steps of someone carrying the weight of legal history. She had spent months preparing for this moment, consulting with child psychologists about the most effective way to communicate with Emma while respecting her unique needs and the court's requirements for admissible testimony. Emma, Lisa Chun began, her voice gentle but clear enough for the court recording equipment to capture every word. Can you tell the court your name? For a moment, Emma remained silent, her eyes focused on Rex rather than the prosecutor. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, but amplified by the sensitive microphones, she spoke her first words to a human in open court. My name is Emma Chun Johnson, she said, her hand never leaving Rex's fur. Rex knows my name? He's been protecting me since the scary time. The courtroom remained absolutely still, everyone present recognizing they were witnessing something unprecedented in American jurisprudence. Defense attorney Wright had multiple objections prepared, but even he seemed reluctant to interrupt what was clearly a breakthrough moment for the traumatized child. Emma, do you remember what happened to you on the day you didn't come home from school? Lisa Chun continued, her approach carefully calibrated to avoid re-traumatizing the witness while eliciting legally admissible testimony. Emma's grip on Rex's fur tightened as she leaned closer to the dog before responding. The scary man took me from the playground, she said, her voice gaining strength. Rex knows about the scary man. I told Rex everything that happened because Rex keeps bad people away from little girls. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, sitting in the expert witness section, watched Emma's body language with professional fascination. The child was exhibiting none of the dissociative behaviors or panic responses that had characterized her earlier attempts at human communication. Rex's presence was providing exactly the emotional regulation that Dr. Walsh had predicted in her testimony. Emma, can you tell us about the man who took you? Lisa Chun asked, knowing that this question would be crucial for establishing the identification testimony that the case required. Emma turned to look directly at Rex, her voice becoming more conversational as she shifted into her established pattern of communicating through her canine confidant. Rex, remember the scary man with the hurt face? "He had a big scar like this," she said, tracing a line down her own cheek. "His face was angry, and he smelled like cigarettes and a place where cars get fixed. He drove the red truck with fire pictures that we drew together." The courtroom held its collective breath as Emma continued her testimony, speaking directly to Rex while the microphones captured every word. Her account was detailed, consistent, and delivered with the natural cadence of a child, recounting events to her most trusted friend. She described being taken from the playground, the drive to Kellerman's garage, and the 3 days of captivity with a clarity that would have been impressive from any witness, but was extraordinary, coming from a trauma survivor. Judge Hamilton observed the testimony with the trained eye of someone who had presided over thousands of witness examinations. Emma's demeanor, vocal patterns, and body language all indicated truthful recollection rather than coached testimony or fantasy. More importantly, the child was clearly not being led or manipulated by the prosecution. She was simply telling her story in the only way she felt safe doing so. "Rex helped me stay brave," Emma continued, her voice becoming stronger with each sentence. "I told Rex that the scary man said nobody would look for me, but I knew Rex would find me because that's what hero dogs do. Rex saved me from the dark place where the broken cars sleep." The most powerful moment came when Prosecutor Lisa Chun asked Emma to identify her attacker. A photograph display had been prepared showing 6 different men, including Robert Kellerman. Emma looked at each photo carefully, then pointed directly at Kellerman's image. "That's him, Rex," she said clearly, her voice carrying throughout the silent courtroom. "That's the scary man who took me. Tell everyone that's the person who hurt me and said I couldn't go home." Defense attorney Wright finally rose to object, arguing that the identification procedure was improper because Emma was addressing the dog rather than the court. Judge Hamilton overruled the objection, noting that Emma's identification was clear, unambiguous, and delivered in open court under oath, regardless of the unusual method of communication. As Emma's direct testimony concluded, everyone in the courtroom understood they had witnessed something unprecedented in American legal history. A traumatized child had found her voice through her bond with a police dog, providing detailed, reliable testimony about serious felony crimes while maintaining the emotional stability necessary to participate in the legal process. The implications extended far beyond this single case. Emma's testimony was establishing precedent for how the courts could accommodate trauma victims, whose injuries required unconventional communication methods. Her whispered words to Rex were reshaping the intersection of psychology, law, and justice in ways that would impact countless future cases. As court recessed for the day, Emma remained on the carpet with Rex, whispering words of gratitude to the dog, who had given her the courage to seek justice. The nation watched, the legal community debated, and a brave little girl continued to heal through the extraordinary bond she shared with her 4-legged guardian. The second day of testimony began with an atmosphere so tense that even the court reporter's fingers seemed to tremble as she prepared to document what everyone suspected would be the most difficult part of Emma's testimony. Defense attorney Thomas Wright had spent the entire night preparing his cross-examination strategy, knowing that his constitutional duty to zealously defend his client would require him to challenge the testimony of a traumatized 8-year-old girl. The ethical weight of this responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders as he watched Emma enter the courtroom, once again seeking the comfort of Rex's presence. Emma had slept poorly the night before, according to her foster mother Linda Johnson. The stress of public testimony, combined with the necessity of reliving her traumatic experiences, had triggered nightmares that only Rex's presence during an emergency overnight visit had been able to calm. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had spent an hour that morning working with Emma to prepare her for the more detailed questioning that would be required to establish the full scope of the crimes committed against her. Today might be harder than yesterday, Dr. Walsh had explained to Emma in terms a child could understand. Some of the questions might make you feel scared or sad, but remember that Rex will be right there with you, and all the grown-ups in the courtroom are working to keep you safe now. Prosecutor Lisa Chun approached the witness area with visible concern for Emma's emotional state, but also with the professional determination of someone who knew that justice for this brave little girl depended on eliciting testimony about the darkest aspects of her ordeal. The legal strategy required establishing not just that Emma had been kidnapped, but that she had endured additional trauma that would support the most serious charges against Robert Kellerman. Emma, Lisa Chun began gently, yesterday you told us about being taken from your school playground. Can you tell Rex and all of us what happened after the scary man put you in his truck? Emma's immediate response was to bury her face in Rex's fur, her small body beginning to shake with remembered fear. The courtroom waited in absolute silence as Rex, with the intuitive intelligence that had made him an exceptional police dog, shifted his position to provide Emma with more comfort and security. After several minutes, Emma lifted her head and began to speak in the whispered tones that had become her trademark method of testimony. Rex, remember I told you about the dark place? Emma said, her voice barely audible despite the sensitive microphones. The scary man took me to where the broken cars live, and it smelled like the place where Daddy David fixes our car. But it wasn't nice like when Daddy David fixes things. It was scary and dark, and the scary man said I was his special princess now. Dr. Walsh, monitoring Emma's stress responses from the gallery, noted that the child's breathing remained steady and that she was maintaining physical contact with Rex, positive indicators that she was managing the emotional difficulty of her testimony. The therapeutic relationship between Emma and Rex was functioning exactly as intended, allowing her to process and verbalize traumatic memories without becoming overwhelmed. Defense attorney Wright faced an impossible ethical dilemma. His client deserved a vigorous defense, and the prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of a severely traumatized child whose communication methods were unprecedented in legal history. However, cross-examining Emma would require him to challenge the credibility of a victim who had already endured unimaginable suffering. Wright had filed motions requesting that Emma's cross-examination be conducted in chambers with only essential personnel present, but Judge Hamilton had denied the request, ruling that the defendant's right to a public trial outweighed other considerations. Emma, Lisa Chun continued, her voice maintaining the gentle tone that seemed to help the child remain calm. Can you tell us what happened when you were in the scary place with the broken cars? Emma's response was to turn completely toward Rex, speaking directly into his ear in tones so quiet that the court stenographer had to request clarification. Rex, the scary man said I couldn't go home unless I was a good princess. But he hurt me, Rex. He touched me in my private places like Mommy Linda said nobody should ever touch. And when I cried, he said that bad princesses who cry don't get to see their mommies and daddies again. The impact of Emma's words was immediate and devastating. Several jurors were visibly emotional, with two women openly weeping. Judge Hamilton maintained her professional composure, but even she seemed affected by the raw honesty of a child describing sexual assault in terms that reflected both her innocence and her trauma. Court security officers positioned themselves strategically around Robert Kellerman, whose defense team was frantically taking notes while trying to maintain appropriate courtroom demeanor. Rex kept me safe in my heart, Emma continued, her voice growing slightly stronger as she spoke about her canine protector. Even when I was in the scary place, I talked to imaginary Rex in my head. I told him about the scary man and about being cold and hungry and scared. And real Rex heard me, didn't you, Rex? That's why you came to find me in the dark place with no windows. The courtroom remained in stunned silence as Emma continued her testimony, describing 3 days of captivity with the clarity of a child, but the accuracy of a trained observer. She recounted specific details about her confinement, the smell of motor oil and cigarettes that permeated the garage, the sound of trains that passed nearby every few hours, the peanut butter sandwiches that were her only food, and most heartbreakingly, the ongoing sexual abuse that Kellerman had inflicted while telling her that special princesses had to keep secrets. He said if I told anyone about our secret princess games, something bad would happen to my mommy and daddy and my pet hamster, Mr. Whiskers. Emma testified to Rex. But you taught me that secrets that make you feel scared and sick aren't the kind of secrets that good people keep, right, Rex? Dr. Walsh recognized that Emma was demonstrating remarkable psychological resilience by reframing her trauma through her relationship with Rex. The child was essentially conducting her own therapy session while providing legal testimony, using Rex as both her emotional anchor and her method of processing the most difficult aspects of her experience. When the time came for cross-examination, defense attorney Wright approached the witness area with visible reluctance. He had consulted with child psychology experts about the least traumatic way to challenge Emma's testimony, but there was no precedent for cross-examining a witness who would only speak to a dog. Emma, Wright began, his voice carefully modulated to avoid seeming threatening. I know this is very hard for you. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you can answer them however feels most comfortable, whether that's to me or to Rex. Wright's strategy was to gently probe for inconsistencies in Emma's testimony, while avoiding any approach that might seem to be attacking the child victim. However, Emma's response to his first question immediately demonstrated the challenge he faced. Rex, Emma said, turning away from Wright entirely. The man in the suit is trying to help the scary man. Tell him I don't want to talk to people who help scary men hurt little girls. Judge Hamilton intervened before Wright could respond. Emma, the man asking questions is doing his job, just like the police officers and doctors who have been helping you. You don't have to be afraid of him, and Rex will stay right here with you, no matter what. Wright's cross-examination was necessarily brief and gentle, focusing primarily on ensuring that Emma understood the difference between truth and imagination and establishing that no one had coached her testimony. Emma's responses, delivered consistently through Rex, demonstrated a clear understanding of her experiences and an unwavering consistency in her account of the events. The most powerful moment of the entire trial came when Wright, following his legal obligation to challenge the prosecution's case, suggested that Emma's memories might have been affected by the trauma she had endured. Emma's response was immediate and heartbreaking. She turned to Rex and, in a voice that carried clearly through the silent courtroom, said, Rex, tell the suit man that little girls don't imagine bad men touching them in places that hurt. Tell him that what happened to me was real, and it was scary, and it was wrong. And tell him that you and me know the truth because we lived it together, even when I was in the dark place and you were still looking for me. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Wright, recognizing that any further questioning would only reinforce Emma's credibility and potentially harm his client's case, announced that he had no further questions. Judge Hamilton declared a brief recess, during which several jurors were seen wiping away tears, and even court security officers seemed emotionally affected by Emma's testimony. As Emma remained on the carpet with Rex, whispering words of gratitude for his protection and support, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A brave little girl had found the strength to confront her attacker and seek justice, supported by an unlikely partnership with a police dog who had become her voice, her protector, and her pathway to healing. The prosecution's case was now complete, built on the foundation of Emma's courageous testimony and supported by the physical evidence that corroborated every aspect of her. The second day of testimony began with an atmosphere so tense that even the court reporter's fingers seemed to tremble as she prepared to document what everyone suspected would be the most difficult part of Emma's testimony. Defense attorney Thomas Wright had spent the entire night preparing his cross-examination strategy, knowing that his constitutional duty to zealously defend his client would require him to challenge the testimony of a traumatized 8-year-old girl. The ethical weight of this responsibility sat heavily on his shoulders as he watched Emma enter the courtroom, once again seeking the comfort of Rex's presence. Emma had slept poorly the night before, according to her foster mother Linda Johnson. The stress of public testimony, combined with the necessity of reliving her traumatic experiences, had triggered nightmares that only Rex's presence during an emergency overnight visit had been able to calm. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had spent an hour that morning working with Emma to prepare her for the more detailed questioning that would be required to establish the full scope of the crimes committed against her. Today might be harder than yesterday, Dr. Walsh had explained to Emma in terms a child could understand. Some of the questions might make you feel scared or sad, but remember that Rex will be right there with you, and all the grown-ups in the courtroom are working to keep you safe now. Prosecutor Lisa Chun approached the witness area with visible concern for Emma's emotional state, but also with the professional determination of someone who knew that justice for this brave little girl depended on eliciting testimony about the darkest aspects of her ordeal. The legal strategy required establishing not just that Emma had been kidnapped, but that she had endured additional trauma that would support the most serious charges against Robert Kellerman. Emma, Lisa Chun began gently. Yesterday you told us about being taken from your school playground. Can you tell Rex and all of us what happened after the scary man put you in his truck? Emma's immediate response was to bury her face in Rex's fur, her small body beginning to shake with remembered fear. The courtroom waited in absolute silence as Rex, with the intuitive intelligence that had made him an exceptional police dog, shifted his position to provide Emma with more comfort and security. After several minutes, Emma lifted her head and began to speak in the whispered tones that had become her trademark method of testimony. Rex, remember I told you about the dark place? Emma said, her voice barely audible despite the sensitive microphones. The scary man took me to where the broken cars live, and it smelled like the place where Daddy David fixes our car. But it wasn't nice like when Daddy David fixes things. It was scary and dark, and the scary man said I was his special princess now. Dr. Walsh, monitoring Emma's stress responses from the gallery, noted that the child's breathing remained steady and that she was maintaining physical contact with Rex, positive indicators that she was managing the emotional difficulty of her testimony. The therapeutic relationship between Emma and Rex was functioning exactly as intended, allowing her to process and verbalize traumatic memories without becoming overwhelmed. Defense attorney Wright faced an impossible ethical dilemma. His client deserved a vigorous defense, and the prosecution's case relied heavily on the testimony of a severely traumatized child whose communication methods were unprecedented in legal history. However, cross-examining Emma would require him to challenge the credibility of a victim who had already endured unimaginable suffering. Wright had filed motions requesting that Emma's cross-examination be conducted in chambers with only essential personnel present, but Judge Hamilton had denied the request, ruling that the defendant's right to a public trial outweighed other considerations. Emma, Lisa Chun continued, her voice maintaining the gentle tone that seemed to help the child remain calm. Can you tell us what happened when you were in this scary place with the broken cars? Emma's response was to turn completely toward Rex, speaking directly into his ear, in tones so quiet that the court stenographer had to request clarification. Rex, the scary man said I couldn't go home unless I was a good princess. But he hurt me, Rex. He touched me in my private places like Mommy Linda said nobody should ever touch. And when I cried, he said that bad princesses who cry don't get to see their mommies and daddies again. The impact of Emma's words was immediate and devastating. Several jurors were visibly emotional, with 2 women openly weeping. Judge Hamilton maintained her professional composure but even she seemed affected by the raw honesty of a child, describing sexual assault in terms that reflected both her innocence and her trauma. Court security officers positioned themselves strategically around Robert Kellerman, whose defense team was frantically taking notes while trying to maintain appropriate courtroom demeanor. Rex kept me safe in my heart, Emma continued, her voice growing slightly stronger as she spoke about her canine protector. Even when I was in the scary place, I talked to imaginary Rex in my head. I told him about the scary man and about being cold and hungry and scared. And real Rex heard me, didn't you, Rex? That's why you came to find me in the dark place with no windows. The courtroom remained in stunned silence as Emma continued her testimony, describing 3 days of captivity with the clarity of a child, but the accuracy of a trained observer. She recounted specific details about her confinement, the smell of motor oil and cigarettes that permeated the garage, the sound of trains that passed nearby every few hours, the peanut butter sandwiches that were her only food, and most heartbreakingly, the ongoing sexual abuse that Kellerman had inflicted, while telling her that special princesses had to keep secrets. He said if I told anyone about our secret princess games, something bad would happen to my mommy and daddy and my pet hamster, Mr. Whiskers. Emma testified to Rex. But you taught me that secrets that make you feel scared and sick aren't the kind of secrets that good people keep. Right, Rex? Dr. Walsh recognized that Emma was demonstrating remarkable psychological resilience by reframing her trauma through her relationship with Rex. The child was essentially conducting her own therapy session while providing legal testimony using Rex as both her emotional anchor and her method of processing the most difficult aspects of her experience. When the time came for cross-examination, defense attorney Wright approached the witness area with visible reluctance. He had consulted with child psychology experts about the least traumatic way to challenge Emma's testimony, but there was no precedent for cross-examining a witness who would only speak to a dog. Emma, Wright began, his voice carefully modulated to avoid seeming threatening. I know this is very hard for you. I'm going to ask you some questions, and you can answer them however feels most comfortable, whether that's to me or to Rex. Wright's strategy was to gently probe for inconsistencies in Emma's testimony, while avoiding any approach that might seem to be attacking the child victim. However, Emma's response to his first question immediately demonstrated the challenge he faced. Rex, Emma said, turning away from Wright entirely, the man in the suit is trying to help the scary man. Tell him I don't want to talk to people who help scary men hurt little girls. Judge Hamilton intervened before Wright could respond. Emma, the man asking questions is doing his job, just like the police officers and doctors who have been helping you. You don't have to be afraid of him, and Rex will stay right here with you no matter what. Wright's cross-examination was necessarily brief and gentle, focusing primarily on ensuring that Emma understood the difference between truth and imagination, and establishing that no one had coached her testimony. Emma's responses, delivered consistently through Rex, demonstrated a clear understanding of her experiences and an unwavering consistency in her account of the events. The most powerful moment of the entire trial came when Wright, following his legal obligation to challenge the prosecution's case, suggested that Emma's memories might have been affected by the trauma she had endured. Emma's response was immediate and heartbreaking. She turned to Rex and in a voice that carried clearly through the silent courtroom, sighed, Rex, tell the suit man that little girls don't imagine bad men touching them places that hurt. Tell him that what happened to me was real, and it was scary, and it was wrong. And tell him that you and me know the truth because we lived it together, even when I was in the dark place and you were still looking for me. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. Wright, recognizing that any further questioning would only reinforce Emma's credibility and potentially harm his client's case, announced that he had no further questions. Judge Hamilton declared a brief recess during which several jurors were seen wiping away tears, and even court security officers seemed emotionally affected by Emma's testimony. As Emma remained on the carpet with Rex, whispering words of gratitude for his protection and support, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. A brave little girl had found the strength to confront her attacker and seek justice, supported by an unlikely partnership with a police dog who had become her voice, her. 2 years after the verdict that changed American jurisprudence, 10-year-old Emma Chun Johnson stood confidently at the podium of the National Children's Advocacy Conference in Washington, D.C., her small hands resting on the microphone as she prepared to address an audience of judges, lawyers, child psychologists, and advocates from across the nation. Beside the podium, in a place of honor on a specially designed platform, Rex lay with the dignified bearing of a dog who understood his importance to the proceedings. "My name is Emma Chun Johnson," she began, her voice clear and strong, carrying none of the hesitation that had once characterized her speech. "And this is my best friend and hero. Rex, we're here to tell you that sometimes the scariest things that happen to you can help you do the most important work of your life." The audience, many of whom had followed Emma's story from the beginning, listened with rapt attention as she shared her journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Emma had grown taller and more confident in the 2 years since her testimony, but she retained the earnest intensity that had made her such a compelling witness. Her dark hair now hung loose around her shoulders, and she wore a simple blue dress still, her favorite color, because it reminded her of feeling safe. "Rex taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared," Emma continued, glancing down at her canine partner with obvious affection. "It means you do the right thing, even when you're scared. When I was in the dark place, I was very scared. But I talked to Rex in my heart, and he gave me the courage to remember everything so that when the real Rex found me, I could tell him the truth about the scary man." In the 2 years since the trial, Emma's story had indeed changed the landscape of American justice for children. Emma's law had been enacted in 37 states, establishing the legal right for traumatized child witnesses to testify with emotional support animals present. The law had been applied in over 200 cases, helping countless children find their voices and seek justice for crimes committed against them. Rex, now officially retired from active police duty, had become the most famous therapy dog in America. His partnership with Emma had evolved from a crisis intervention into an ongoing therapeutic relationship that served as a model for animal-assisted healing programs nationwide. The Rex Foundation, which had grown from a local initiative into a national organization, had trained and placed over 300 therapy dogs in courtrooms, hospitals, and crisis centers across the country. "Rex and I wrote a book together," Emma announced to the conference audience, holding up a colorfully illustrated children's book titled Rex and Me, Finding Your Voice When Words Are Hard. The book, which had become a bestseller in the children's trauma recovery genre, used simple language and engaging illustrations to help young readers understand that healing could take many forms and that asking for help was a sign of strength, not weakness. The book tour that had brought Emma and Rex to the conference was just one part of their busy schedule of advocacy work. They regularly visited children's hospitals, where Emma would read to young patients while Rex provided comfort to children facing medical procedures or lengthy treatments. Their visits to schools had become legendary, with Emma sharing age-appropriate versions of her story while emphasizing themes of resilience, the importance of trusted adults, and the healing power of unconditional love, whether from humans or animals. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had accompanied Emma and Rex to the conference, marveled at the transformation she had witnessed in her young patient. "Emma has not only healed from her trauma, she's transformed it into a source of strength that helps others," Dr. Walsh explained during her own presentation to the conference. Her relationship with Rex created a template for healing that we're now applying successfully with hundreds of other children. She's proven that recovery isn't just about returning to who you were before trauma occurred. It's about growing into someone even stronger. The impact of Emma's case extended into academic and professional circles as well. Major universities had established research programs studying the therapeutic effectiveness of human-animal bonds in trauma recovery. Medical schools were incorporating animal-assisted therapy into their curricula. Law schools were teaching courses on innovative approaches to victim advocacy, using Emma's case as the primary example. Detective Sarah Martinez, now Director of Victim Services for the Rex Foundation, had documented the broader changes that Emma's courage had inspired throughout the criminal justice system. Emma's case didn't just change how we handle child witnesses, Martinez explained to conference attendees. It changed how we think about trauma, healing, and the responsibility of the legal system to adapt to meet the needs of the most vulnerable people we serve. We've seen conviction rates in child abuse cases increase by 40% in jurisdictions that have implemented Emma's law protocols. The personal cost of Emma's advocacy work was something that her family, particularly her adoptive parents David and Linda Johnson, monitored carefully. The public attention had been overwhelming at times, but Emma had shown remarkable resilience in managing her role as a spokesperson for children's rights while maintaining the normal activities of childhood. Emma is still very much a 10-year-old girl, Linda Johnson explained during a family interview segment of the conference presentation. She loves art class, gets excited about sleepovers with friends, and occasionally has to be reminded to clean her room. But she also carries this profound sense of purpose about helping other children. She says that Rex taught her that everyone has a job to do in making the world safer for kids. The Johnson family had been officially approved to adopt Emma permanently, a legal proceeding that had been celebrated throughout their community. Emma's integration into their family had been gradual but complete, with Rex serving as a bridge that helped her learn to trust human love again. The family had also been approved to keep Rex as a permanent family member, ensuring that Emma's therapeutic relationship with her canine guardian could continue indefinitely. Officer Dan Murphy, who remained Rex's official handler despite the dog's retirement from active police work, had observed the remarkable evolution of both Emma and Rex over the past 2 years. Rex has aged gracefully into his role as a therapy dog, Murphy reported. He seems to understand that his job now is different, but equally important. When he's with Emma during their advocacy work, he's alert and protective. When they're at home with the Johnson family, he's just a beloved family pet who happens to be the most famous dog in America. The conference presentation concluded with Emma reading a passage from her book while Rex demonstrated some of the calming behaviors that therapy dogs use to help children feel safe. The audience watched in fascination as Rex responded to subtle cues from Emma, positioning himself to provide maximum comfort and security while never interfering with her ability to communicate clearly with the adults present. "The most important thing I want everyone to remember," Emma said as she concluded her presentation, "is that every child deserves to have their voice heard, even if they need help finding it. Rex helped me find my voice when I was too scared to use it. Now we travel around the country, helping other kids find their voices too. Sometimes a child's voice might be whispers to a therapy dog, or drawings that show what happened, or even just pointing to pictures when talking is too hard. A grown-up's job is to listen however a child can speak." Standing ovation that followed Emma's presentation lasted for several minutes, with many attendees openly emotional at witnessing the transformation of a traumatized 7-year-old into a confident, articulate advocate for children's rights. Emma accepted the applause with the grace of someone who understood that her story belonged not just to her, but to every child who had ever needed help finding the courage to speak their truth. As Emma and Rex left the stage together, she leaning down to whisper words of praise and gratitude to her faithful companion. Everyone present understood they had witnessed something extraordinary. A little girl's whispered words to a police dog had not only brought justice in a single case, but had fundamentally changed how society approached the protection and healing of its most vulnerable members. The dark chapter of Emma's childhood had been transformed into a beacon of hope for countless other children. Her story with Rex would continue inspiring legal reform, therapeutic innovation, and individual acts of courage for generations to come. Sometimes, as Emma had learned, the smallest voices, when amplified by love and determination, could indeed change the world.